Local law enforcement has expressed frustration with citizens taking political signs all across the state. That includes the Hancock County Sheriff's Office. Earlier this month, a Facebook post reminded people that it's not only disrespectful, it's illegal to remove political signs from someone else's property. The department has received complaints of people removing or burning signs from private property. There is a state law that outlines where political signs can be placed and the type of violations an individual could face if they break the law. While more incidents happen as Election Day gets closer, law enforcement says the bottom line is to respect your neighbors and the law.
There are other things that can be charged to an individual that does destroy or deface signs, such as theft or criminal mischief and things like that. So one thing that we'd always like to remind people is that everybody has a right to have their own political opinion, and especially during this time of year, that we encourage people to respect that right and to leave political signs be.
Lieutenant Dupuis says, "Don't think your actions will go unnoticed." He hopes local citizens will set an example and keep the peace.